theta is 3/8, and theta is not in quadrant 1, find sine of theta and tan of theta. Now, this is a unit on trigonometry. So I'm going to give you a hint that one of the key strategies that we're going to use is drawing a triangle. I know, trigonometry and drawing triangles, like, whoever thought of this was brilliant. Okay? Now, you are going to have to use a lot of information that you've known in the past. For this example, you need to know how the cast rule works. If cos of theta is 3/8 and it's not in quadrant 1, which quadrant is it in? It's going to be in quadrant 4, because cos of theta is positive 3/8. And according to the cast rule tells us where things are positive. All of them are positive in quadrant 1, but it's not in quadrant 1. The S means only sine is positive in quadrant 2. The T means only tangent is positive in quadrant 3. And the C means that only cosine is positive in quadrant 4. So every trig ratio has 2 quadrants where it's positive and 2 quadrants where it's negative. So for drawing my triangle, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an angle somewhere in quadrant 4. Thank you. And then I'm going to go back to my nearest x-axis to make sure that my triangle includes the reference angle. So it has to go back to the nearest x-axis because reference angles are important. Then, once that triangle is drawn, you know from SOHCAHTOA that cos is your adjacent side over your hypotenuse. So with my reference angle, I can label the adjacent as 3, my hypotenuse as 8. And you guys are going to get so quick at doing a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Most of the time you won't even show any work. You'll just write the answer down. Okay? But if you wanted to show the work, you'd be like 3 squared plus something equals 8 squared. So if I wanted to get the other side by itself, but what you're going to do is you're going to be like, oh, 8 squared, 64. 64 minus 9 is 55. And so this side is the square root of 55. And because I've got my triangle drawn and I can label the other side, now it's easy to say what sine of theta will be. Because I know that sine of theta is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. And because it's in quadrant 4, it has to be negative. And tan of theta is my opposite side over my adjacent side. And again, because it's in quadrant 4, tangent has to be negative as well. So we're going to use this idea of drawing a triangle in the right quadrant with the reference angle, very important, because sometimes you might be tempted to go to the y-axis. A reference angle is always back to the x-axis. And label your side to figure things out.
Is units non-calculated?
A lot of it's non-calculated. There's some calculated stuff. All the stuff that have to memorize on a unit circle is not calculated. Okay. Now, is this point on the unit circle? Gut feeling that most students have is no. Because you just made a unit circle and you have a bunch of points and this one doesn't show up. But we didn't label every single point on the circle, did we? There's an infinite amount of points on this circle, which means that this could be one of them. If it's on the unit circle, right, the equation of the circle is x squared plus y squared equals 1, which is sine squared, our big idea, that sine squared theta plus cos squared theta equals 1. And this question with different numbers was on the exam in January. So, how do we go about this? on the unit circle, sine squared plus cos squared theta equals 1, or x squared plus y squared equals 1. That's the equation of the unit circle. We have to check, is root 3 over 3 squared plus root 6 over 3 squared, what is it equal to? Okay? Well, how do you square a fraction? Multiply tops, multiply bottoms. You see that this will become 3 over 9. And this will become 6 over 9. Equals 9 over 9, which equals 1. If it was written this way, you would get full marks. A number of students lost a half a mark because they wrote equals 1 right away. You haven't figured that out yet. You don't know if it's equal to 1. And what happened on the exam is that it actually didn't add up to 1. But they wrote equals 1, wrote equals 1, wrote equals 1, and then went, no, it doesn't equal, it's not. But they still lost the half a mark because they made an, you can't assume it's true before you proved it. So that's why I wrote a statement that says if it's on the unit circle, it has to equal 1, x squared plus y squared equals 1. Then I just started, without this here, started figuring it out. And once I figured it out and said it was 1, I can now say, yes, it is. This course is really particular. Speaking of which, I'm going to do a couple more examples. Then I have a bunch of things to hand back to you because we have our test. So that's going to be important. If this is a point on the unit circle, find y. And there are a couple of different options that we can do. So I'll just write out options. My favorite option is the triangle because it's trigonometry. But you could also use the big idea that x squared plus y squared equals 1 for the unit circle, or sine squared theta plus cos squared theta equals 1. Okay? I like the triangle because the numbers are easier, but I'll show you both ways quickly. I know it's in quadrant 3, so I would draw in quadrant 3, go back to my nearest x-axis, and label my reference x. And because they told me the x-coordinate from our big idea, the x-coordinate, we would know that cos of theta is negative 12 over 13. And so cos is your adjacent over hypotenuse. And I often just label it with positive numbers because that's an actual triangle with actual lengths. And you don't need to label a negative side. But then I use my cast rule afterwards to figure things out. Okay? I obviously didn't draw this to scale because if you do a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you will figure out that the other side is 5. And if that's 5, then I would know that sine of theta is negative 5 over 13, and I know it's negative because it's in quadrant 3. But it didn't ask me, if I left it like this, it asked me to find y. I need to make sure that I realize and write that as the final answer. Okay? I like the triangle better because it's really obvious from the cast rule that you need a negative answer in quadrant 3. If you used x squared plus y squared equals 1, for 1, look at the numbers you're working with. And you'd have to get the y squared by itself, so you'd have to get a common denominator. And then you'd have to square root both sides, and remember plus or minus when you square root both sides. And then have to realize it's in quadrant 3 and say it's only the negative one. So there's just so many more places I find that it would be easier to make mistakes. That's why I like the triangle method for this one. But it's nice to see this as well, because we needed the x squared plus y squared equals 1 for our last question. Perfect. We are going to end there. We'll continue these notes tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow's your test, but on Friday.